Hello, folks. This is Jonathan from Safe Routes Partnership. We're going to get started in just a minute. Good afternoon. My name is Jonathan Matz. I'm California's Senior Policy Manager for the Safe Routes Partnership. Welcome to our third and final webinar focused on Cycle 5 of the Active Transportation Program. This one is quite simply entitled What's Changed in Cycle 5. Before I get started, I just wanted to extend our best wishes to everybody during these times of confinement and physical distancing. We hope that you and your close ones and the people in your community are making it through the current pandemic as safely as possible. At the end of our presentation, and we as well sharing some of the resources that we have been continually posting at the partnership about maintaining safe routes practices during the time of confinement. So a little bit about us. We're a nonprofit organization that seeks to advance safe walking and bicycling to and from schools in order to improve the health and well-being of kids of all ethnicities, income levels, and abilities. And in doing, fostering the creation of healthy communities for everyone. These are indeed challenging times to be pursuing that mission. A little bit about this webinar series that you find yourself with. This is the first cycle of the Active Transportation Program in which we've been doing the series, and our goal has been to help first-time applicants, under-resourced applicants, and as well as those who have applied before but not been successful in the Active Transportation Program to unlock the keys to success. It's consistent with a lot of work that we've been doing around the ATP for years. We put together a guide to the ATP in 2018. The link to that, to download that is below there. And in this webinar series, we started it in September with a focus on getting started with your application, some kind of initial questions to be asking about year ahead of the application deadline. Just a month ago, we had a webinar focused on the statement of need within the ATP application, and actually one of our other presenter this afternoon was also a presenter on that webinar as well. Just a little bit about me. I've been with the partnership for going on 3 years. And in that capacity, I sit on the ATP Technical Advisory Committee, in which I've participated in a number of subgroups, counts, non-infrastructure plans, and quick build working groups as well. We also, at the partnership, provide assistance to under-resourced communities applying to the ATP. We started doing that in Cycle 4, and so far we've had the pleasure of working with 7 communities. My co-presenter today is Megan Pedron from the California Transportation Commission. A little bit of a bio here. She joined CCC in 2015, and her main focus has been on the Active Transportation Program during her time at the CTC, including the development of the guidelines, the application, scoring rubrics, all of the things that we're going to be going over today. She has reviewed more than 500 ATP applications over 4 cycles, which is a number that I struggle to comprehend. But she has kind of seen everything that can be applied for and some best practices in that. She'll be a great resource in before we get started, we did want to update attendees on the ATP schedule. Probably most of you have heard this by now, but at a special meeting of the CTC last week, an extension on the application deadline was approved because of challenges facing agencies during the COVID-19 crisis. So the regular application deadline for ATP projects has been moved from June 15th to September 15th. It's about as far back as it could be moved, but we also wanted to give agencies more time to work with external partners whose workloads may have been radically shifted because of the crisis. One exception to that move of the deadline has been that the Quick Build pilot program, which is a new pilot program in this cycle of the ATP, the deadline for that was moved only a month, so not until September 15th, but until July 15th, in the spirit of trying to get those projects implemented as quickly as possible. Megan's going to be going over exactly what the Quick Build pilot program is and what the applications for that look like. But beware, there is a little bit of a reprieve if you're planning to apply for that, but not as long as for the traditional ATP applications. You'll also see on this table, there have been kind of corresponding adjustments to the evaluation and selection process, to the metropolitan planning organizations deciding on their project list. So the full table is posted here, and you'll be able to consult it as well. The slides from this presentation will be available after this webinar is done. So with that, sorry, I'm going to go back and I'm going to hand this over to Megan, who's going to briefly go over that program that I just.
Hi, Jonathan, thank you. So I am going to discuss the Quick Build pilot program. So for those of you who don't know, Quick Builds are interim capital projects that can further the goals of the active transportation program, and they often require more minor construction activities and are built with lower to moderate cost materials, and they only are supposed to last for 1 to 5 years in most cases. And they're also meant to be put up very quickly. However, a quick process doesn't always coincide with government processes and allocation processes. So the commission really wanted to do a pilot program to kind of see if quick builds can be a viable and successful component of the active transportation program. So it was decided that up to 7 million would be dedicated to the quick build projects out of the statewide component. And we kind of want to give that 7 million, one, because the stakeholders were supporting of going up to that much, but also because we really want to see several projects be awarded and kind of go through this process so we can see what challenges may arise and what things in our processes may need to be changed or tweaked, and just make sure that quick builds can be successful and kind of continue to further grow the program. So like Jonathan said, the new due date is July 15th, and you can find the application on the Caltrans ATP website, which I've linked to the PowerPoint. And another part of the reason why we only gave a 1-month extension and why most stakeholders felt that was reasonable was because this application is very pared down. It's really a Word document. It doesn't require nearly as much data or resources and attachments as the traditional applications do. And so everyone was comfortable that 1 month would be able to get the application in. Another thing that's different with the pilot program is the evaluation process. CTC staff will be the ones reviewing and coming up with the final staff recommendations for the Quick Build pilot program, rather than going through the normal evaluation process of going to a 2-person evaluator team and coming to a consensus score. The CTC will read and grade every single Quick Build and kind of choose the ones that best fit and do the best in the things we're looking for, such as need, community engagement, plan for continued engagement throughout the Quick Build, interagency support, and sort of maintenance and long-term funding plans for these projects. Another thing I wanted to remind everyone was that the Quick Builds will be state-only funded to kind of help speed up the process of getting the projects built and on the streets as quickly as possible. And then the reporting requirements will also be a little different. Applicants that are successful will have to adhere to reporting requirements, but currently CTC staff and Caltrans staff are putting together and finalizing some guidance for Quick Builds, and that's where there will be more explanation on reporting and scope changes for those that do end up being successful in receiving funding through this pilot program, since some of those things just aren't going to be the same process and we may have to tweak them along the way. So that is what I have for Quick Builds. Jonathan, if you want to take it back.
I will. Thanks, Megan, for that. So for the traditional ATP applications that you may be familiar with, not a huge amount has changed from cycle 4 to cycle 5. Going into cycle 4, the program got a pretty comprehensive overhaul. As frequent applicants may remember, we went from having 1 application type to 5. And those 5 application types remain in place, but some things have changed in the guidelines and thresholds this cycle, as well as some future changes for starting in cycle 6 have been announced, and we wanted to give applicants a heads up about those. So on that note, you may have noticed if you've had the chance to peruse the guidelines, that's starting in cycle 6, so the cycle after one. There will be points awarded to proposed projects that are included in an active transportation plan or other similar plan, whether it's a mobility plan perhaps or regional transportation plan, some kind of planning document that demonstrates that this has been an identified priority of the community for a period of time. This is not a yet fully formed proposal, and exactly how many points will be awarded is yet to be decided. That'll be decided during the guidelines development process for 6. But we wanted to let applicants know about that potential change now. It so happens that you can get your plan funded through the active transportation program. We've long encouraged, particularly under-resourced communities, to start their ATP programs by applying for a plan, and so if having one on the books will be an advantage in your infrastructure and non-infrastructure programs going forward. So that's one thing to consider as you develop your application through the cycle. Another thing that's changed in cycle 5 revolves around the points for disadvantaged communities. As you may be aware, the active transportation program has a mandate and statute to allocate at least a quarter of the benefits to disadvantaged communities, and there are further points available to applicants for projects that benefit disadvantaged communities, as well as projects that demonstrate the most disadvantaged of them. So perhaps the most significant change has been that there is now a 4th statewide metric to qualify for disadvantaged community status. You may be familiar with Cal screen, area median income, and the percent of students qualifying for the free and reduced lunch program. All of those remain on the books, but there's been the addition of the Healthy Places Index, which is a tool developed by the Public Health Alliance of Southern California. It's a statewide tool that uses a score for any census tract in the state of California. And you'll be able to qualify for full severity points with that tool as well. So we've listed down here in the slides what the strata are for severity using the Healthy Places Index. Really quite similar to how severity is calculated currently using Cal screen. In addition, the qualification of using a regional disadvantaged community metric, so something approved by your MPO, for example, those will still be accepted. You'll check off, if you're planning to use a metric like that, you check the other box on the application when it asks how you are going to be calculating disadvantaged community status, and you'll indicate then the regional disadvantaged community definition as well as supporting documents for that as well. As you may remember, similar from cycle 5, if you use a regional DAC metric, you will be foregoing some of the severity points available to you by using a statewide metric such as the Healthy Places Index or Cal screen and the like. And there will also be an opportunity, particularly in the large infrastructure application, but not only when discussing the benefit to communities, an opportunity to explain what strategies your agency or community is putting in place or plans to put in place in order to guard against any displacement that might occur because of additional transportation infrastructure as an ATP grant. So if you have developed a strategy to mitigate against that, there will be an opportunity to explain how in the application. Another relatively small change is in the leveraging points. So you may be familiar in the medium and large infrastructure application. There are points available to applicants who are able to put forward some leveraging dollars. It has to be in the form of actual cash on hand. Changes regarding that. One is that if the application comes from a tribal community, it will automatically receive full leveraging points in the medium and large infrastructure categories, and that's because there are a lot of funding sources which are generally not available to tribal communities, and so in recognition of that comparative lack of funding opportunities, tribal communities applying to do infrastructure in one of those two categories will automatically get full leveraging points. As well, the threshold between small and medium infrastructure has been moved a little bit. You may remember that in the last cycle, the small infrastructure application was for use of all projects up to $1.5 million, and that's been moved a little bit up to $2 million. So if you're able to get a project in under $2 million, you would not, for example, be foregoing points if you have any leveraging money. And that is, of course, that is the total project cost, and not just what you're asking the ATP to fund. So if you are submitting an application in the small category, seeking 1.4 million in ATP money, in addition to $300,000 that you already have on hand, the total project would come in at 1.7 million. You'd still fall in the small infrastructure. That's just an example. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Megan to talk a little bit, to start our discussion on the rubrics and scoring.
Okay, hello, I'm back. I'm sorry that my screen was hidden the last time, but I think I've got it fixed for now. So this was the quick build pilot program slide if you missed part of it from last time. So next I'm going to talk about scope and plan layout consistency. So the question is found in the 3 infrastructure applications, the large, medium, and small. And the point of the question is really to look at the consistency between the three main elements within an application: layouts and maps, the engineer's estimate, and the project schedule, and how all of those come together to tell or be the project, show the project, and if those coincide with the narrative that the application has written. So commission decided with stakeholder support to increase the points of the scope and plan layout consistency for all 3 of the infrastructure projects. Large, it was increased from 2 to 7 points because we decided to combine the scope and plan layout consistency with the 5 points from the cost effectiveness question. So in this question, evaluators are also given guidance in the large application to look at cost effectiveness and if the applicant really did the best to make sure they were putting forth the best project in the most cost effective way. In the medium, it was increased from 2 to 5 points, and in the small is increased from 2 to 3 points. And what's also really great about this cycle is that all of the evaluator teams will have the opportunity to meet, or will meet, with Caltrans and commission staff in phone debriefs, and that will allow evaluators to ask any questions that they may have had about the layouts or the schedules or anything that came up that they just weren't sure about, because Caltrans does do their evaluation on the deliverability and eligibility of the projects. And then I wanted to let everyone know and remind anyone who doesn't already know that Caltrans did hold a workshop that laid out what applicants should be including in their application to be a PSR equivalent. And that was really a how-to in order to be successful on this question. Jaime Espinoza ran it, and he had a really good presentation, really good PowerPoint. It really laid it out simply and showed that you don't need a lot of fancy things to show the project, show what the scope of the project is, show where it is. And so I've linked both the presentation and his recording here so that you can locate those, but if not, they are also still up on the CTC's ATP website. So you can go and find those and listen to it to kind of give yourself a refresher and make sure your application has everything it should have. Next, I'm going to talk about performance metrics. So the biggest change with the performance metrics for this cycle is that applicants will only be required to do these performance metrics if they are successful and chosen for funding in this cycle. In the past, applicants had to include counts, and in an effort to try and make the application process easier and not as expensive for applicants, since there are so many applicants that apply and right now it's so oversubscribed, we're not able to fund as many as we would like. So we took away the count requirement. However, those that are successful will have to submit count data, and this cycle follow the interim count methodology guidance, which is currently up on the Caltrans website. And they will also have to give the commission their destinations within 1/4 of a mile and 1 mile. And then the commission will use the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Benefits calculator to come up with the outputs that the calculator gives, such as vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas reductions for new facilities and bike shares. One question we have kind of got with this that I wanted to address was that even though counts are not required, if an applicant wants to include counts in their narrative, if they've already conducted counts in a project and think that those counts can further show the importance of this project and how much the community wants it, they are welcome to put that in their narrative. It's just no longer required. And then I also wanted to point out that the Active Transportation Resource Center has a loan counter program. So they have automated pedestrian and bicyclist counters for agencies to borrow to help them meet the expectations for user counts once they are successful. And Jonathan, now I will switch it back over to you to talk about the project selection.
On project selection, a few small changes. Well, a couple relatively small ones, and then a potentially fairly impactful one. First is on the evaluation process. All applications will continue to be reviewed in pairs of 2 evaluators, one from Northern California and one from Southern California. So that basic structure of the evaluation process has not changed. However, meaningful comments will be required from all evaluation teams on every single application. It has been a source of some critique in the past. We think a justified one, that sometimes wasn't enough information given to particularly unsuccessful applicants about what could be improved the next time around. So all evaluation forms that don't have detailed comments for the applicants will be returned, and evaluators will be asked to complete those. In addition, all evaluator teams will discuss the applications that they've reviewed. It's usually somewhere around 10 to 11 per team, with CTC staff, regardless of whether or not there's any discrepancy or any issues with the evaluation process. So you may remember that in previous cycles, a volunteer evaluation team would receive a stack of applications to review. They would come up with consensus scores, send them over to the CTC. In the meantime, CTC staff would also be assigning scores on their own to applications, and in the event that there was any kind of consistent discrepancy between what a particular team was finding and how the CTC staff was guiding it, there would be a kind of quality control conversation, just to see if there were any issues that needed to be addressed in the evaluation. This time, that check-in between CTC staff and evaluators will just become a standardized part of the process for all teams, in an effort to make sure that there's a consistent set of eyes or some consistency in how projects are being scored from team to team. As well, there's been more guidance on the question of transformative projects. So you may remember that this was a question that was asked for the first time in cycle 4 in the large infrastructure category. And that question remains, but there's more guidance this time, and particularly in the scoring rubric, about what exactly that means. And in particular, the scoring rubrics and the application itself will be seeking to get at how your project supports existing and planned housing in your community, especially affordable housing. So really kind of trying to prod the applicant to explain how this project fits in with a strategy of an overall transformation of a community, a city, or a neighborhood into one that's more walk and bike friendly, less auto dependent on the whole. And you'll also have the opportunity to talk about what other projects, either in development or that have already been implemented, complement the project that you're applying to the ATP for. And then finally, public participation. So the ATP guidelines were just being finalized and approved right when the COVID-19 crisis really came to a head in California, and right as school closures were starting to be ordered, stay-at-home ordinances were starting to be put in effect, and suffice to say that definitely disrupted a lot of ATP planning and projects, and just the workload generally of agencies across the state. And one area where it has particularly affected a lot of applications has been in the area of public participation. So with that in mind, there will be guidance issued to the evaluators to take into account how the COVID-19 crisis may have disrupted applicants' public participation, and applicants as well will be encouraged to describe what they had been planning to do before the COVID-19 crisis hit, as well as what steps they've taken to mitigate against that, or to salvage some sort of public participation efforts. So as an example of how you should address this, the public participation, if you're an applicant and some of your planned activities have been disrupted by COVID-19, this is certainly not an invitation to just write down that you've been planning to do a bunch of efforts and then confinement struck, and so you just canceled everything and left it at that. It's certainly not a get out of jail free card. But on the other hand, we are cognizant of the fact that a lot of communities had workshops scheduled, had meetings with PTA groups at schools that they were planning to include in their application, and those have had to be canceled, or at least the in-person versions of those. We at Safe House Partnership, technical assistance with a few communities were applying this cycle, and that happened to the communities that we're working with as well. In those cases, we have transitioned to doing virtual workshops, which we're now having to kind of plan and schedule from scratch. And there are challenges involved in that, ranging from letting the community know about it, ensuring that everybody can participate, which is definitely an issue in communities with less access to high-speed internet. With translation can be an issue as well. So it's certainly not an easy substitute for the kinds of workshops that applicants may have been used to doing. But you can still do very well on the public participation part of the application if you explain what the challenges were, and just demonstrate that you really try to come up with as many creative solutions as possible to continue engaging with the public even during these very unique times, whether it was sending information home. Some school districts, for example, are doing weekly pickup and drop off of materials that parents bring home to their kids. So maybe you're sending out surveys that way. Other school districts which have been had an easier time doing virtual learning, coordinating with the principals and using the communications they're already having with families to get the word out about a virtual workshop, things like that. There are plenty of opportunities. We partnership as well as our allies and organizations like the Untitled have put out resources about what we think equitable community outreach could look like during COVID-19. We'll have some links to that at the end of this presentation. So know that all is not lost, and we do expect that evaluators will be understanding, but it is nevertheless incumbent on applicants to demonstrate that really all creative solutions were tried, and if there were still obstacles, that'll be understood. But just make sure that you detail what they were and how you tried to overcome them. And I believe one more thing, Megan's just going to talk about some of the changes for projects that are successful in being awarded. So I'll hand it over to her.
Thank you, Jonathan. So yes, like you said, if your project is funded in this next cycle, there was one change with cost increases. So the active transportation program does not fund cost increases. However, the one exception that was added to the guidelines this cycle was that Caltrans implemented projects may receive cost increases. However, this will only be given if all of their cost-saving measures, including scope modifications, have been exhausted and the project cannot proceed without additional funds. And the additional funds will be apportioned from the next ATP cycle. And this is because Caltrans doesn't have access to other sources of funding that agencies do. And these Caltrans cost increases must still be approved by the commission in the same manner as a cost increase for other commission programs. Next, I'm going to talk about sort of the clarifying language that we did in the scoring rubrics. When commission staff first started working on the scoring rubrics, one of the biggest things was sort of cleaning up and clarifying the language to help both evaluators and applicants who are using the scoring rubrics really know what each question is asking for and what is expected to receive full points for each question. And this really also came out of the evaluator debrief that we held after the 2019 cycle, where evaluators said there were sections where they just felt that more clarity could have been given to help them know and lead them to what scores should be given. So one of the first things that we did was we removed duplicative language, and we tried to reduce the amount of times that we say the same thing different ways. So now it's really, if you see something is stated more than once, it's because that's how important it is, not just because we know 7 ways to say one thing. The next thing that we worked on was we made it really clear what should lead to the extreme scores, whether it's full points on a question or evaluators giving 0 on a question. And those should really be clear in either that the question and the answer is absolutely perfect, they hit all the points, the applicant included lots of supporting documentation, it all made sense, and there was absolutely nothing more they could do to get full points. or it should be clear that the applicant basically didn't answer the question and there's no way the evaluators could find a way to give them a point. We really wanted that if evaluators are giving scores at those polls, it should be very clear to anyone who opens up the application and looks at it. And then something we also worked on was we really wanted to emphasize the importance of attachments for several questions, and how if there are no attachments included, for example, in the public participation question, like Jonathan was just mentioning, if an applicant doesn't include any sign-in sheets, any flyers, any pictures, any documentation to support what they're discussing in that question, they really should not be receiving full points, because that is a really big part of that question, and showing that the work was done and the outreach and engagement was there for these projects to ensure that these were the best projects for the community and the projects that the community really wanted and will use going forward. And then the last thing that we worked on in the scoring rubrics, as far as just sort of clarifying language, was really emphasizing questions that have a part A and a part B and how they should really be connected. Because we do have several questions where the first part of the question is asking, what the need is, whether it's the need for the project or a safety need, something like that. And then the second part, once the applicant has said what the need is saying how this specific project is the best answer to the need. And for those questions, we really want to make it clear that they should work together, that they should really be telling the same story about the same project, and that they should connect in a way that makes it clear and easy for evaluators to see the point of the project. And one last thing I wanted to point out was for applicants that are applying this cycle, the ATRC is still is available for all applicants. They can help with technical assistance. They can help with any issues with the NI projects, and they still have resources such as webinars and trainings on how to put together and turn in an application that will be successful. So I wanted to give a shout out to the ATRC because it's a really great resource for applicants as well as those who have received funding. And Jonathan, I think that's it for me.
Thanks, Megan. We'll now take Q&A. I just wanted to mention one thing that I had meant to talk about when I was talking about public participation. On the note of disrupted communications, if you, for example, were planning a combined infrastructure, non-infrastructure application, that's best practice that we at the partnership have advocated for a while. CTC also has been suggesting it. Combined infrastructure and non-infrastructure programs, we think, are the most impactful on the ground, particularly for Safe Routes to School projects. They also tend to be more successful in getting funded by the ATP. We encourage you to continue doing that. Obviously, with schools being closed and the reopening being uncertain, and communication with decision makers at the schools, whether it's principals or folks at district headquarters, all that's been made considerably more complicated. We would just encourage you not to feel deterred from submitting a combined infrastructure, non-infrastructure grant in those circumstances. Perhaps all agreements may not be able to get confirmed on paper by the time the ATP deadline comes in. But through conversations we've had, we're confident that that shouldn't be detrimental to your success in the program, as well as when implementation time comes around. Hopefully, either confinement will have ended at that point, since we're talking about 2021 at the earliest, or there will be some arrangements to be made if actually implementing the non-infrastructure component proves to be a challenge. We do know that a lot of the programs that tend to be done in schools are more challenging to do in a time of physical distancing. Things like walking school buses and bike rodeos are a little more complicated to do when everybody has to be 6 feet apart. But we're putting together resources on how to think creatively about that, and there are a lot of crowdsourced documents that we can share as well. So that'll be coming at the end. And with that, just wanted to see if there are any questions. Put them in the question box there. Let's see here. There's one. Thank you. What are some examples of effective strategies for reducing displacement that successful applicants have implemented in the past? If a proposed project is transformative in that it promotes connections to an investment in future affordable housing, would it still need to prove that it is preventing displacement? So there is not a strict guidance on that question yet. We are really leaving it open to applicants to talk about things that they may or may not be doing. The kind of thing that you mentioned would, I feel confident, be seen as a genuine active displacement measure if it's tied in particularly to development. For example, you may be implementing things to the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities program. Certainly, providing more access to and from existing affordable housing and affordable housing that's being planned would certainly be seen as part of an anti-displacement strategy. Honestly, thinking about developing a comprehensive anti-displacement strategy is still a fairly new concept in a lot of planning circles. So there's not yet a full, or at least at DC and from the application, the guidelines workshops, it became clear that there has not yet been enough time for agencies to fully map those out yet. So there's not a requirement for an anti-displacement strategy per se. But if that's something that your community has been working on, and either you've adopted a plan for it or have implemented local policies around it, those are the kinds of things that you should mention. Any other questions?
Jonathan, I also just want to add on, I agree with everything he said, and the commission understands that right now anti-displacement and just those strategies are really newer, and that a lot of cities and counties and agencies are still learning what effective anti-displacement strategies there are. And really, this question, we wanted to put it into the application to start getting applicants to really start thinking about it more and more, because we know that displacement in housing will be coming up more in future cycles, and that it's a really important aspect of the administration. And so we wanted to get those in there, but for this cycle, the biggest thing will be, like what Jonathan said, is to say how you are, or how your city or agency is looking at it, and really just make sure you address this point in the disadvantages communities question. Even just to say, you know, when we were out doing workshops and site visits, we had one small agency that said, we just did this huge beautification project and have seen no displacement. So if you say, you know, we've had this sort of history in the past few years, we don't believe that this will lead to displacement, that is addressing the displacement issue. So we really just want applicants to be thinking about it and saying how they're going to work to make sure displacement doesn't lead to this, or how maybe the city is, but we understand that this will not be a fully fleshed out answer from applicants right now.
Thanks, and I'm also seeing more questions did come in. The box was really small, so I'll take them from the earliest submitted to ask. Question, can a project be submitted as both a quick build and a traditional application? Megan, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe that there's anything specifically prohibiting that. It would be hard for me to imagine how or why you would do that. They're completely different applications, and I'll actually answer another question that came in while answering this one. While there's no maximum dollar amount for a quick build project, or minimum for that matter, there's $7 million total in the pilot program, and the intent is to fund more than one application with that money. But even though the small infrastructure application, for example, is a fairly short and straightforward one, it's still nevertheless considerably more cumbersome and requires a lot more data and outreach than the quick build one does. So I suppose theoretically you could submit an application in the quick build in July, fully flesh it out for an infrastructure application in September. You're not going to hear the results about the quick build before you submit before the September deadline passes for the traditional ATP applications. So you be submitting 2 applications without knowing if either was successful. So it's not a practice that we would advise. Question here, confirmed DAC qualification is mandatory for cycle 5 and not beginning in cycle 6. It's actually not mandatory that your application, that your project be in a disadvantaged community or SERB 1. There's certainly an incentive towards selecting projects that are either located and or benefit disadvantaged communities. However, your application will be reviewed and accepted even if it doesn't benefit one, but because of the way the point structure is set up, there's certainly an incentive to do it. But it's never actually been a requirement, and there's no movement to make it one that I'm aware of. Somebody asked, have NPOs directly spearheaded a quick build project? Well, this is the first application in which quick build applications, our first cycle in which there is a quick build application. So far, no agency's ever submitted one, and it remains to be seen exactly what kind of applications come through and who the applicants generally are. I do know of at least one NPO which is planning on submitting an application for a suite of quick build projects throughout the counties under its jurisdiction. So I know that is in the works. I don't actually have much of a read on what other agencies are planning to apply for that. But yes, it definitely seems to be something that at least one NPO is considering doing. And similar question, what total cost is considered low for the quick build? Again, there isn't a track record yet, so there's no guidance on what's considered low or high. The key thing really is going to be, I think, how quickly you can get it off the ground, and as Megan mentioned before, how you plan to engage the community during its lifespan to refine it. Certainly, if you can talk about how you would plan to use a quick build project to, in turn buttress your subsequent ATP application for more permanent infrastructure down the line. I would think that would a slide showing points allocated to different HPI scores and how many disadvantaged community points beginning for cycle 6. Does this sort of thing exist for the cycle? So that chart that I showed was actually for this current cycle, cycle 5. And yes, similar severity strata do exist for the other metrics along the same lines. There are up to 4 points, whether you're talking about free or reduced lunch, area and median income, or Cal-Enviro screen. With Cal-Enviro screen, for example, just like with HPI, you qualify for disadvantaged community status by being in the top quartile or bottom quartile, as it would be, and then within that, further points for severity.
Jonathan,
Is there,
before you move on,
yeah.
so one of the questions you mentioned, someone asked if MPOs have funded quick builds through their MPO component before. Last cycle, yes, one MPO did fund a quick build project because they put it within their regional guidelines that quick builds would be allowed. So there was one, and for the quick build pilot program this time, we do know of at least a couple MPOs that are planning on, if there are competitive ones, to do that again. Sorry, I heard that. I wanted to double check before I let you know.
Sure, no, that's fine. I hadn't interpreted the question to be meaning about in the MPO component. So thanks for picking up on that.
Oh, okay, yes.
But yeah, okay. No, but that's helpful to know as well. A particular metric viewers will be using to measure connections to or impacts on housing. I think Megan touched on this. No current metrics yet on that or officially provided by CTC. Some examples of quick build projects. I believe Megan also mentioned this, some things like this as well. It could be things like bollards to implement a protected bike lane, for example. It generally has to do with temporary materials, things that can be put in place without, for example, major curb and gutter, that kind of thing. Next question, one of our city staff.
Oh, and sorry. For those that are wondering about examples of quick builds, in the guidelines, in the Appendix D, where it has guidance for the quick build pilot program, we do have resources for quick builds. If anyone wants to look at those resources, they're really good, and they will have examples of quick builds that might help an agency who's looking into this.
Thanks. And then quickly, there's a question about projects must have CEQA approval in order to be eligible. I don't believe that's the case. Megan, correct me if I'm wrong about that, but I have never heard of such a thing.
I'm wondering if they mean in the quick build pilot program, there's a line that says quick build projects must be CEQA compliant, and that the project is a plan that's cleared by CEQA. That's for the quick builds, correct?
Okay. Thanks for that clarification. What are some, okay, so a few more about displacement strategies. I think we've touched on those. Also a question about non-infrastructure programs. Do you agree some buffer? Yes. Jeannie, you put this question. We're hoping Caltrans will approve a range of activities, trying to be prepared for a wide range of situations. Would some buffering language be wise? I would think so, yes. It doesn't hurt. For sure, evidence that you're thinking creatively about our current situation, I think would be well received by evaluators. Somebody asked, are Zoom public alternative? Well, they're an alternative. They certainly have their drawbacks, but we certainly in the communities that we're working with, we're going ahead with organizing some in lieu of the in-person workshops that we have on the calendar. And there are reasons to think that they're less inclusive. I mentioned before, we've put out resources about how to try to compensate for that fact. But we certainly think it's worth an effort. And yes, try to think of virtual ways to do the same kind of outreach that you were planning to do previously. Any leverage funds should not make the project exceed the project size based on costs. That's correct, I believe. This is from Juliet Ortiz, a question about leveraging funds. So if, for example, the leveraging fund you're putting forward in combination with what your ask is for the ATP, put your application in one infrastructure category, then you go in that larger one. You would submit an application for that larger. And I think we are at time now. Won't be able to get to all questions, but I have my email on this slide here. Please do get in touch if we did not have time to answer your question, and I'll do so to the best of my ability, or forward it on to someone like Megan who may be able to help. I mentioned as well resources that we've been putting out about active transportation and safe routes practices during the COVID-19 pandemic, and they're available at those links there. Just an easy way to remember is bit.ly/safe-routes COVID, and then so far we published 7, so COVID 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And there will be more to come. These slides as well will be available shortly after this. We close out this webinar here. So thanks again for your time. Thank you, Megan, for coming on not once but twice during our webinar series. And good luck to you during these troubling times and with your ATP application. Please know that we're here to help, and feel free to bounce some ideas on us as well. Any closing thoughts, Megan?
No, just thank you for having me, and hope everyone's safe and healthy right now.
Okay, take care, everybody.